The world is a beautiful, evolving place. We are dismantling oppressive systems, climate change efforts are accelerating, we are more sustainable now than we have ever been in the past century, and we are even sending spaceships to Mars. We are finally moving in the forward direction. What if I told you that this is an illusion? As I started this course, this illusion started to break. That glass ceiling started to crack, and I began to see how paradoxical our common approaches to global challenges were. I realized that I had a lot of unlearning to do. At the start of this journey, I fell straight into the trap of protecting my ego by putting myself at the center of my narrative. I felt entitled to preaching the groundbreaking truths I was learning about, and in doing so, actually avoided getting uncomfortable with it. When writing my reflection at the end of the first week, I just regurgitated the information without actually sinking deep into it, and I was only engaging with the material on a surface level. Envisioning the House of Modernity really put into perspective the idea that I have helped build a house that exceeds the limits of the planet, and that it is not an infinite resource. This helped me recognize my responsibility in global challenges and to take accountability. I recognized my tendency to see myself as exceptional in order to justify moral authority and avoid taking responsibility, specifically in my belief that I have less responsibility in issues of systemic racism because I'm a person of color. I prided myself in knowing about the white savior complex, but during my process of unlearning during this course, I realized that I also adopt a sort of white savior complex in my tendency to find quick solutions for things and thinking that the ways of knowing I have learned from Western education is the only thing to help save the world. But how much listening am I doing? When realizing that the famous fish adage, "Give a man a fish and he won't be hungry for a day, but teach him how to fish and he won't be hungry for a lifetime," is actually bullshit, it made me feel discouraged. How can a saying that felt so positive and revolutionary in its perspective on problem solving be so problematic in real life? I realized that I was looking at this in a very narrow way. How would that man be able to fish if we have polluted his oceans and streams? How would he be able to feed himself if we have overfished the seas and his rights are controlled by landlords? This gave me grief to know that as I create demand in these industries, I also contribute to this issue. I profit off poverty and the vulnerable as much as mega corporations do. I am no exception. This is when I realized that not only do I have the tendencies to adopt a human-centric view of the world, but I also tend to view the world in a very Western-centric way. This made me wonder whether I've been making the effort to create spaces for voices, ways of knowing, and knowledge systems. This is also when I started to recognize that I had to approach my unlearning with humility, transparency, and honesty of my mistakes and my role in what knowledge I am passing down to younger generations. And as a result, contributing to colonialism and cultural extinction. However, I need to be careful here, as my guilt and anger would be long-term ditches on the path to visceral accountability, and I would need a more permanent source of motivation. I had a long road ahead. The next stage of my unlearning process began with recognizing that I am not just an innocent, vulnerable member of society, and made me acknowledge that I am both being actively misled as well as being willingly complicit, and how central denial is to both. I thought a lot about my role in my own deception. I like living in a neat and clean house. I get rid of my waste or hide my mess so it gives me the illusion that my surroundings are beautiful and that I'm comfortable. This is the same way I treat my waste while living in the House of Modernity. I put it away so that I don't have to acknowledge it. It is the waste products of my consumerism, capitalism, and colonialism, and the denial of my role in systemic violence, contribution to poverty cycles, oppression, unsustainability, and my complicity of these. I've recognized a cycle. Let's be real, this isn't new information. Acknowledging that I'm entangled in global challenges and that I have certain privileges that shelter me isn't a groundbreaking truth. I recognize that whenever I have moments of humility and hyper-reflexivity like this, I feel angry or upset. I educate myself further on these topics, which leads me to feel like I'm taking responsibility and makes me feel better. But then I subvert back to feeling complicit, and then the cycle continues. I started to feel like humanity was not going anywhere. But this inspired me to want to keep recognizing whenever I fell into this cycle and use it as inspiration to make an actual systemic difference. I started to have so many questions like, how can I not let my hope, promise, and need for solutions become a crutch in making a systemic difference? I learned that sometimes this is okay. I need something to sustain me without being consumed by grief and the messiness of the world. And sometimes we need crutches. But I've begun to discern when it is helping me and when it is preventing me from going deeper. This also made me realize that knowledge itself and ways of knowing are limited, and although education can be a helpful tool for me to seek alternatives that help dismantle systems of oppression, I'm beginning to recognize that they too will be limited and inaccurate. I am learning that I tend to fall into the cycles of gaining knowledge, being emotionally reactive towards it, followed by continuing to not make any active changes in my life to change the issue. Sometimes the pursuit of better knowledge can be a barrier to me, preventing me from taking risks and learning through failing. I'm realizing that it is okay to fail. It is okay to recognize that hope and my illusion is comforting to me. This really stood out to me when recognizing society's disconnect from nature and my own faltering connection with it. I thought about my own desires for being one with nature, and in doing so, romanticized entanglement and connectivity between all earthly beings as being about reconnecting. I now recognize that I was seeing entanglement as a source of vitality, but as I thought about the difficult parts of it, such as my contribution to systems of oppression, it actually became a source of grief I was struggling to process. I am beginning to realize that part of the long-term processing and my journey of unlearning is holding all the beauty, but also all the darkness and all the in-between. I'm starting to catch my mistakes and my own failures, and starting to be honest with myself as I move past denial. I can't talk about hope if I haven't even seen reality. I'm reminded about the traveling story of the Four Mountains told by Cree elder John Cryer, and about how Indigenous education is deeply rooted in preparing people from birth to become good elders and ancestors for all relations. This story danced with me, especially when hearing about the Hunter-Provider Mountain and how its rite of passage is about seeing the bigger picture. It made me question, what are my medicines and gifts that are spoken about in this story, and how am I making mistakes with them? Are these gifts my privilege and access to education? Am I letting them be excuses and barriers to creating lasting change? I'm realizing that learning to work with these gifts in order to better the community around me requires me to be humble and practice humility and discernment. And although this is challenging and uncomfortable, I'm learning to use what I have to make systemic change as I recognize there is a long road ahead.